You think gas stations are just places to grab coffee and cheap snacks? Think again. There's something about fluorescent lights at 2 in the morning, the hum in the air, the way the aisles look like they go on forever. That liminal quiet makes ordinary places feel thin, like a membrane between the mundane and something raw. I know this because I worked nights at a station like that, and what walked through my door one night still plays behind my eyes. My name is David. I worked the graveyard shift at a rundown station on the edge of nowhere, owner cheap, no overnight security, the kind of place where the digital clock on the wall blinked 12 times until you stopped noticing. Most nights it was boredom and loneliness, with a side of static from the old radio. The cooler hummed, the fluorescent lights buzzed, the register dinged when someone bought a candy bar. You get used to the rhythm, the tiny routines that keep you awake, refilling the slushy machine, sweeping the sugar dust under the slushy lid, scanning a pack of gum, making small talk when someone brave enough to be out at that hour wandered in. It's amazing how quickly that rhythm can change. 1 second you're counting change, the next you're looking at something that doesn't belong in any normal night's inventory. He opened the door like anyone else, no rush, no stagger. He had on a jacket soaked dark in places I didn't want to think about. At first, my brain refused the obvious. Maybe he'd cut himself? Maybe it was paint? He moved slow, and there was this weird calm to him, like he'd come in from a long walk and was finally taking a breath. But his eyes, they were empty in a way that made the fluorescent hum louder. You notice details when you're alone, the way someone's hands tremble, the scent that clings to their clothes, the way they hold themselves. He walked down an aisle, picked up a bottle, put it back, walked to the register, set a few things on the counter. I remember thinking, don't overreact, this is your job. He paid in cash. He counted it carefully, then smiled without moving much of his face. Keep the change, he said. I don't know why I asked him if he was okay. It was because you ask people that when they look like they've been run over by life, it's a reflex. He seemed almost pleased to be asked. I'm fine, he said, and his voice had a softness I couldn't place. Calm as anything. It wasn't my blood, he told me, as if I'd said the word. There was a composure that didn't fit the look of him. It made the whole thing worse. I tried to shake it off. I called my girlfriend later that night, told her about the guy. She laughed it off. You and your ghost stories. And I laughed in a way that meant I didn't know what to do. I told my manager the next day, who just shrugged and said, people come through. Cheap owner, remember? Security didn't seem to be on anyone's priority list. Then a few nights later he came back. Different mood. When the bell over the door chimed, I thought maybe someone was playing a prank. But the bell sounded the same as always, and the man's face was too calm to be part of a joke. He stood there and watched me. That's when the unease slid from the back of my skull to the base of my neck. He moved like a storm that had decided it didn't need to make a scene, like he was pacing himself the way someone pacing a room would time their breathing. I did what maybe every frightened, overworked clerk did. I called 911. I told the operator the least dramatic version I could. There's a guy who looks hurt. Maybe. I kept my voice even, practiced. The dispatcher said they'd send someone. That help was on the way. The man watched me while I spoke on the phone. Not openly hostile, not aggressive. More like someone verifying that a part of his plan was playing out. He left without incident after a few minutes, and the radio on the counter continued to play whatever sad playlist the old owner kept. But something in me felt like a line had been crossed. He came back again. This time he noticed I'd called the police. He walked straight up to me, as if I'd invited him. I remember the quiet when he stood there, a silence that makes you aware of everything. The buzz of the light, the clock's tiny tick, my own breath. You called them, he said, not loud, matter of fact, not a question. The thing that made it colder was how sure he seemed that I had done it deliberately. I lied. I said I hadn't, that it was probably a neighbor. He looked like someone who had been waiting to catch me in the lie. "I know you did," he said, like he'd been keeping a record. The confrontation didn't escalate slowly. It was sudden, the way violence often is, like the snap of a twig that sounded insignificant until you realize it's the first sign of something huge. He moved across the counter, all at once, like gravity had turned its face toward me. I remember the counter edge under my palms, and then his hands around my throat, my feet scrambling for purchase on the slick tile. There's a dumb animal clarity when you're being choked. Sounds get muffled, there's heat in your face, your vision tunnels. Your mind looks for ways out, for tricks you've seen on TV that don't work in real life. I bluffed. I'd never handled a gun. I'd seen enough TV to know what people do. I said, "I've got a gun," as if I really did. The words fell out of me, clumsy and urgent. He froze for a second, his hands tightening, and then he let go like someone dropping a weight they hadn't meant to carry. He backed off, all softness again, and then left through the door like the night had simply moved on. I hit the floor and vomited, because your body knows what your mouth won't say. Police searched. They did their thing. The forms, the questions. They took a report and left at dawn with a cup of takeout coffee. No arrests, no headline, no satisfying wrap-up. That's important. Real horror rarely comes with resolution. They looked at the CCTV. They looked at the entrance. They did what they could with what there was. And then it drifted into that file drawer where everything that unsettles you goes to rest. I was left with scars, not just the ones on my neck, but the cold, permanent trace behind my eyes. I kept sleeping with the radio on, left extra lights on in the tiny apartment above the shop, and bought a cheap baseball bat I shoved under the bed, more as an insurance policy for my own nerves than because I thought I'd use it. If you're into real late-night horror, hit like and stick around. I'm telling you 3 of the worst things that happened at gas stations, and if you think the first one was bad, wait until you hear the next. After that night, I kept an eye out like a man who had been shown how fragile the thin film of normal could be. Months passed, night shifts blurred into one another. You get this hyper-awareness at night. Every parked car, every set of footsteps sounds loaded. People who used to be invisible become something you catalogue. When someone's behavior falls outside that small catalogue, it sticks. One night, a man in a suit came in. Nothing about a tailored suit should have been unusual at 2 a.m., except that it was. The station didn't get suits. It got truckers in stained jackets, students with hoodies, the occasional exhausted nurse. This man looked like he stepped out of an office building with a print portfolio under his arm. He may as well have been wearing the wrong movie. He had one of those watches, that small talkers. He paid cash. His shirt was immaculate. He didn't browse. He walked right up to me, slid something across the counter and said, "Have you seen him?" The thing he slid across the counter was a photograph. I don't know why it felt obscene to touch. In it, the blood-covered man from those nights stared back in grainy black and white, like a mugshot left out on a kitchen table. My stomach did something weird. The suited man's eyes were on mine, calm and relentless. "Have you seen him?" he asked again. I didn't tell him the truth. What would I have said? Yes, he attacked me and dragged me halfway into panic, and I pretend I can sleep at night. So I lied. "No," I said. He didn't seem surprised. "I know you're lying," he said then, like accusing me of something intimate and impossible. He didn't threaten in words. His stillness was the threat. He left like a man whose business was complete, and for days after, I kept replaying that exchange. It wasn't just the photograph. It was the implication that someone else was watching, someone who knew more than they should. Then there were the signs, small at first. A silver SUV showed up more than once in the lot at odd hours. Parked on the shoulder of the road while I was stocking, idling at the far end while I closed, there like a punctuation mark. At night, your brain will anthropomorphize the ordinary. A stone becomes a face, a shadow becomes a person. But the SUV was deliberate. It wasn't figment. It was too consistent to be coincidence. Once, on my way home, it pulled out of a side street and matched my speed. Just matching, never aggressive. I handed the wheel a pretense of normalcy and pulled off when I could, but the hair on my arms didn't settle until I was in my driveway. The escalation was sudden. One night I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. It was the sound that cleaves sleep and grabs you by the throat, the brittle scream of something that used to be whole. My living room window had a hole the size of a fist, the glass spiderwebbed outward. There was no note, no and, just a rock, perfectly thrown. The rock sat on my coffee table like an accusation. I called the police that time. They came and did the walkthrough, asked me questions about enemies I didn't have, about debts I hadn't incurred, about people I'd crossed. Their faces were kind but sterile. They wrote it down and said they'd increase patrols. There was no statement made in arraignment, no indictment, no person taken away for this violation. It felt personal in a way violence seldom does when it's done by a stranger. Like someone had aimed not just to scare me, but to teach me a geometry of danger around my home. I quit the job that week. I started sleeping at different places for a while, moved apartments twice in a month, never staying in the same place long enough to get comfortable. The suit and the photograph folded into my life like a hinge, opening a door to questions I didn't want to answer. Was he connected to the bloody man? Were they working together? Was the suited man warning me, threatening me, or simply confirming that I had been seen? I never found answers. The police had their files. I had my fear. I kept telling myself leaving was the right move. I packed what I could into a backpack and drove until the road unhooked me from that small town and I started sleeping without the light on. But the unease followed. You patch your life around it, but you don't remove the memory. Every time I hear the pedestrian bell at a convenience store, every time a car idles too long at a pump, my skin goes electric. That pattern, stranger violence, a person who shouldn't be there, someone who watches. It's not just my story. It's the kind of thing that becomes a constant in lots of people's late-night lives. Which leads me to the third story, and this one isn't mine. I heard it from a fellow driver at a truck stop, a short, tight recounting over coffee that I couldn't shake. The man who told it kept his voice low, like he was reciting something private. He'd been on a long haul, exhausted, and had pulled off at a highway gas station to nap in the cab of his pickup. Sleeping in vehicles at rest stops is part of the job for a lot of drivers, an awkward necessity. He parked, rolled the windows up, curled into the seat, set a single alarm to give him half an hour, and drifted. When you're that tired, sleep doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like currency. He says he woke with that small twilight confusion, hands on the wheel for just a second before he realized the truck was moving. There's a strange terror that comes when the thing you think of as solid, the truck, your personal bubble of safety, has been breached from the outside. He looked up and saw the glass separating the cab from the bed being hammered from the outside. The sound was a series of bangs, sharp, impatient knocks that rattled his teeth. Then a loud crack as something with mass impacted the glass. He slammed the brakes so hard the whole truck pitched forward and his head smacked the glass. The man in the bed didn't climb in. He banged the glass like he was trying to get a response. The driver says he felt like his skin came off. He was furious and terrified. He swerved. By the time he pulled over, the intruder had leapt from the bed of the truck and run into the darkness. The driver climbed into the bed. What he found there made him turn his face to the night and drive. There was a black trash bag, wrapped tight, slick with something that left a smell, rotten and metallic and alive in a way his description made me imagine a wound. He touched it briefly, enough to stain his hands, and somehow decided not to call the authorities that night, not to make the encounter public. I asked him why, and he said, "I don't know. Maybe fear, maybe the road. You want to keep moving." He drove to a friend's garage, paid someone to replace the glass, cleaned the truck himself in a bathroom stall, scrubbed until his hands almost bled, and he still felt filmy. He never filed a report. At least not one he'd told me about. He said that in a way it felt less real if he didn't put it on paper. That idea, that some things remain personal because acknowledging them makes them permanent, stayed with me. He told me he started sleeping with the keys in his hand, that he avoided rest stops when he could, that he never let the truck's cab feel like home again. The image I keep returning to is small, a wrapped wet bag folded into the dark, like something someone thought they could hide by the side of the road. The image made safe things feel like potential threats. The grocery bag you leave in the back seat, the blanket thrown over a spare tire. He still drives. He still does his job. He carries an invisible residue now. He told me, flat, that it was the worst thing that had ever happened to him on the road. No headline, no closure, just a mark. 3 different nights. 3 different men, one who attacked in front of the counter, one who watched in a suit and left a photograph like a ledger, one who banged the glass of a pickup as it carried a secret across the highway. They share a geography. Gas stations, those thin, exposed places where you can be in public and yet completely unguarded. They share another thing. None of them ended with tidy justice. No mugshots posted, no arrests, no verdicts to close the file. The worst part, I think, isn't the physical violence. It's the way these encounters settle into your days afterward. You can cut yourself, you can get stitches, but the way a night like that rearranges your trust, makes every sound a potential threat, that's the real wound. People ask why I didn't stay and fight, why I didn't call someone and demand answers. Maybe because the world in its day-to-day doesn't always offer the types of answers you want, or maybe because when you're young and tired and under-supported, leaving is the only power you can exercise. I told myself I did the rational thing. I left the job when the pattern suggested it wasn't a one-off. I moved. I changed my routine. Those are the choices people tell you are sensible. But sensible doesn't mean safe. The emptiness of not knowing, why me, why that gas station, what did the suited man want, hovers over everything. You spend nights scanning for patterns, and sometimes you convince yourself you've found one where there isn't one. And sometimes you miss the pattern that matters. There's a peculiar cruelty to unresolved threats. They live in the margins, in the way you rehearse exits and check locked doors 3 times. They teach you to be small in spaces that used to feel neutral. They teach you to notice cars and faces, to catalogue behavior like a librarian of suspicion. They haunt you because you can't see the person answer for what they did. You can only carry the memory like an ache. And yet, here's the other thing I learned, telling it out loud helps. Not because the story needs an audience to validate it, but because silence makes the fear grow roots. Telling the story gets it out of the attic of your mind, where it multiplies. Sharing doesn't make the danger go away, but it moves it from a private, gnawing thing into a shared caution. When I talk about the blood-covered man, the suited man, the truck-bed intruder, I remember details I would have otherwise smoothed over. I remember the exact way the bell sounded when each one walked in, the smell that clung, the taste of fear like pennies in my mouth, because those specifics are anchors. They keep the memory from ballooning into something else. If there's any takeaway here beyond be careful, it's this. Late-night places have their own rules and their own risks. People who work late nights or travel at odd hours occupy a world that can be beautiful. The empty sky, the quiet hum of a town sleeping, but it's also vulnerable to encounters that don't fit any narrative we're comfortable with. You don't always have the luxury of a perfect response. You respond with what you have, a lie to save your life, a bluff to make someone back off, a decision to walk away and live. I won't tell you how to react in a crisis. I won't glorify confrontation or offer dangerous advice. I will tell you what happened, because the truth of it is sometimes the most unsettling thing. Ordinary nights can tilt, and nothing ties those tilts up neatly. The people who did these things to me and to the other driver, whether they were passing strangers, sentinels of a bigger plan, or just random bad actors, never showed themselves to me again. The suited man, The silver SUV, the wrapped trash bag, each of them became a ghost that hovered around certain nights. So if you've ever found yourself waiting at a pump under a lonely light and wondered whether someone out there is watching, you're not alone. These stories don't offer closure, they offer reminders. To be aware, to trust instincts, to notice the small things that add up, to share so the memory doesn't fester alone. If any of this struck a chord, if you've got your own late-night gas station horror or something that kept you up, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell your story. And if you want more of these true late-night encounters, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.